Okay.
And since you're doing it, I don't know if it'll record on to your Zoom account or if it will still record to the Nebraska account. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
we'll find out. Yeah. Okay. Let me let folks share screen, hold that up. And then we'll let folks in. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks, Misty, for being a friendly face and waving to me.
Anytime.
We've got lots of people coming in.
Sharon, I think you need to start the slideshow and what you're sharing.
Oh, is it not? Let me do that. There we go. Thank you.
It might be the view. We can see the rest of your screen.
Oh, still?
Sharing.
Okay, let me
Yeah.
try to stop share and then share again in a moment. Hello, welcome everyone. Is that better?
You got it.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. Hello, hello, everyone. I was observing a virtual class a couple weeks ago and it felt like yoga. Everybody was joining. But some of you are on the move. Welcome, feel free to get the chat going. We're going to give folks, another couple minutes. We're seeing some answers populating in the chat. Thank you very much. Yep, thank you. Thank you, Lisa, Christy, Brenda, Deanna, Patty. Thank you, Beth. Tammy, yep. Great. Terrific. So as you're joining, we are taking a moment. If you've already populated your answer in the chat, if you want to scroll up and just see what other folks wrote in terms of their main purpose for assessing students. And it's intentionally broad, right? It's not end of year assessments. It's not checks for understanding. It's both and. Okay. So I am are we at, I can't see how many, if we're at a good starting point, Chris, are we there?
We're at about 50 participants right now.
Great.
I think we can give it another minute and then we can get started, Shireen, whenever you all are ready.
Sounds good. Yeah, so we have a lot of different reasons for assessing students, and we're just sharing what our main purpose is. Ooh, Virginia, I like that. Okay, so welcome to session number 2. I feel like a cruise director right now, but we are going to dive in this afternoon. I'm trying to make sure, here we go. So today's session is all about planning your approach to diagnosing student learning. So this is us, again, it's a great show, but that's not what this is about. That's Chris with a beard though. So if you don't recognize him, it's pre-COVID. And we are joining you today for the second session. If you joined us last time, welcome back. If you did not, just some norms around participating the way that you feel most comfortable. So if you are a person who likes to jump off mute and share your thoughts and join the discussion, feel free. If you'd rather put them in the chat, that's okay too. If you could really center this experience, ideally it's being on video, but understanding that everybody's in a different place and able to focus on different things. If you could, please, you should have in your in the invite, you should have the documents that you need that are attached, and then we'll also throw in the chat the handout that you can use and that you'll be referencing when we do some of the work later in the session. And if you could please, while you're not sharing something, make sure that you're muted so that the background noise is not a problem. So this is the second of 8 where we're focusing on accelerating learning. And the next session on Thursday is focusing on ELA and math. So if there are any specific folks who, that is central to their work, it would be really valuable for them to join us for the next session. But we did the introduction last time. I believe it's going to get posted on the Launch Nebraska site. And we introduced this idea of our learning acceleration guide. Today, we're going to focus more on diagnosing the unfinished work. So we have 5 questions that we'll be able to answer collectively by the end of this session today. We will answer what a diagnostic is, how it is different from assessments generally, how we use the data from those diagnostics, and what resources teachers and leaders should use to diagnose unfinished learning. Finally, we will answer the question how we, folks on this call, but then also classroom teachers and school leaders, could use the information to accelerate student learning. So we're going to ground ourselves in some research from NWEA, and I know you guys use MAP testing as well. Fun fact, my classroom in the South Bronx, roughly 1 million years ago, was one of the labs, one of the pilots for the MAP test. So I distinctly remember my students sitting down in front of computers and, me being fascinated by this. But NWEA has a large sample size as a result of being computer adaptive and nationally recognized, and they're identifying or predicting that 50% of the math learning might be unfinished and 30% of the reading learning might be unfinished. So in the past, we as educators, have addressed learning loss in one of three ways. Retention being sort of more of the primary school, maybe middle school. If, it kind of lands on Einstein's definition of insanity, like doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. So that is one way that we've done this. Social promotion, and that, sort of seemed to be a solution and a problem in and of itself in terms of addressing learning loss. And remediation, and this we see, I think, more at the high school level, where students need to meet certain benchmarks in order to graduate or in order to pursue post-secondary opportunities. And teaching that content again and again in the hopes that they achieve some level of mastery before moving on to whatever their next step is. So those are the three ways, and those three ways, as well-intentioned as they may be, don't entirely address the socioeconomic underpinnings of learning loss historically, but also now. And we know that unfinished learning is really, has been prevalent all through teaching, right? Like if you're a high school based person, you might have thought back to, oh my gosh, I wish the middle schools would blah, blah, blah. And I wish then the middle school teachers are all saying, I wish the elementary schools would blah, blah, blah. And that it's like, I wish in utero this child had heard whatever, like it just keeps going back, right? Like, so unfinished learning has existed since school has existed. And these have been the ways that we've sort of solved for it. But now it's going to be more universal. And there's this, and even if you are on, and you guys have been on campus largely and back in the buildings, the trauma of COVID and however it might have been laid out and experienced by the students will need to be addressed. So acceleration is something we identified and we shared about at length in both our acceleration guide, but also in our discussion last Thursday. And we really need to focus on acceleration and not remediation, because we have seen what the result could be. And we shared a little bit, if you were with us last time, we were talking about in New Orleans, post-Katrina, and Elizabeth, who is presenting with me today, shared about what that looked like and what the risks truly became when people focused, instead of on acceleration, they focused on remediation. So we're keeping grade level content at the heart of instruction. So if I could please have one very kind, brave soul come off mute and read what the remediation programs focus on. I'll be eternally grateful.
This is Christy. I can read this.
Thank you, Christy.
Yep. Remediation programs often focus on drilling students on isolated skills that bear little resemblance to current curriculum. Most often, students experience programs that include activities that connect to standards from years ago and have a goal of students mastering content from years past.
Thank you. So we're focusing backwards, whereas accelerated learning does what? Would you mind reading that too?
Sure. Accelerated learning strategically prepares students for success in current grade level work, what's happening this week on this content. Acceleration readies students for new learning. Past concepts and skills are addressed, but always in the purposeful context of future learning.
Thank you so much. So we have this idea of just in time, right? Like accelerated learning is about the skills that students need to learn, and they need to learn it in order to access the current material. It's not the checklist of things that teachers often feel like they need to address from years past. So we have shared these 4 different things that as a state and as individual districts and schools, you guys will want to focus on. This particular session is zooming in on planning our approach to diagnosing students' unfinished learning and the prerequisite content knowledge that those students will need in order to access the current work. So how should students or should systems approach diagnostics? So we've got 3 big components to making sure that we as educators are clear on what the unfinished learning is of students. So first, it's to compile the existing data. Then it's using the essential content list that the state of Nebraska has designed to determine what data is missing or where there may be gaps by students. And then it's to plan your approach to really understanding the students' thinking and their thinking needs in order to face those challenges. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the first one. If you remember from our last session, we read an excerpt of the first chapter of this book. And I'm going to give you a moment to just refresh your memory and read this quote. So if you can throw in the chat what value, how helpful those kinds of color-coded every detail. I mean, I honestly, and this is like something that speaks to my age more than anything, but I remember when my students were sitting for math and it was, you know, touted as this computer adaptive test, and there was nothing else like it except for the GRE at the time. And I remember wanting, I was circulating around the room like any good proctor, and I would look over the shoulders of the kids and they were all working and answering different problems. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I could not design a test like this, and I can't wait to see what I get from this. And then when I got the test results, and at that point, this was before MAP was MAP, I didn't even really know what to do with it because it was so overwhelming. And, you know, I was sitting down to actually plan for To Kill a Mockingbird. At that point, I was teaching 8th grade English. And I remember thinking to myself, like, it did tell me whether kids knew the difference between limited narrators or third-person narrators and first-person narrators. But what it couldn't tell me was the difference between a reliable narrator and an unreliable narrator, or the value of choosing a child to tell the story of To Kill a Mockingbird, right? So that's what I think of when I think of the color-coded spreadsheets. Not that we had a color printer in my school, but we can get a lot of this data from these tests, and it can still feel overwhelming. So my wondering is if you can take a moment and jot in the chat a test that has been helpful, but possibly not giving information that you knew how to use. Maybe let's frame it like that. This is kind of what are some maybe tests that kids have taken, that you have administered, that some assessments that you, I think I'm looking. Oh, hi, Corn. Yep. Thank you, Megan. It gives us a place to start. It helps to define things. Yep, screeners. Oh no, no data. Yeah, so, you know, the testing is there and the diagnosing is different. And that's one of the things that we're going to focus on today. Thank you. Thank you both for sharing. Okay, I am trying to move this over. So you in Nebraska have really a lot of legwork in place, both in terms of English and math being broken up into primary and then secondary for the high school math. On the English one of the things that really struck me was that it did not, it specifically named the essential content that could be addressed in the ways that what the considerations the teachers could make in ensuring that those standards were addressed. So I think to specifically, we talked a little bit last time about how obviously teaching kids how to read is a stopping point, and you need to make sure that students are able to read. So those early childhood and the first couple of grades are going to be super important. But as you go through the remaining, the essential content in the remaining grades, it clearly builds on each other, and it offers ways for teachers to think about how they might plan for what the gaps might be. Diagnostics shouldn't cover everything. Elizabeth and I were talking earlier today, and I learned by analogy, and we were talking about what the equivalent would be of a diagnosis. And I think of, you know, I'm using a sports analogy, which is insane because I don't play sports. But if you're on a team and your coach says, you know, we really need to work on something specific like free throws, and the different elements of what one would need to work on, they're not going to test you. They're not trying to find out all of your different skills. At that point, they're really focusing in on the one thing. And so I think that's one of the risks that we face when we're doing this sort of diagnosis work, is there's a tendency to go and get as much information as humanly possible. And this is not that. And then this last step is about planning your approach to understanding student learning and the thinking needs and continued challenges. So we are going to actually go through this whole process together, and you'll get to experience this, and Elizabeth is going to walk us through it. But when we're starting, we're going to take a look at what tools should systems use to diagnose student learning or uncover an unfinished learning. So some of these look maybe more familiar than others. And you have your prioritized content list to determine what is missing and where there are gaps. I am going to make a plug for the high quality instructional materials that exist. I know you guys are using Zern, which is great, and it has incredible results, especially when it comes to identifying the very specific gaps in math that students have. I'm going to send you guys off into randomized groups for you to think about what you might have, what data, what tools you might have at your disposal to help diagnose learning. Oh, and thank you. Let's do that. So when you go off into groups, you're just going to have a minute to chat with whomever you randomly get paired with. Say hello, introduce yourselves, and go to what tools you have at your disposal for diagnosing student learning. And I'm actually having a really tough.
I got the group, Shireen. I can open it.
Thank you.
All right, so everyone will be in a group of 4 to 5 folks, so you can talk and share about assessments you've used.
I get so nervous. Oh my gosh. 11, okay. Hi, John.
Hi, I got kicked out.
Oh no, welcome back.
Okay, there I see a breakout room.
Okay.
Shireen, I can broadcast the question just in case people forgot. What's the
Thank you.
specific question you want me to broadcast?
It's what different kinds of assessment tools do they have at their disposal? Marissa, you're the Marissa from the webinar I watched today.
Hi, Marissa. Good to see your name again.
Hey guys, I'll have my camera on pretty soon. I just having a little bandwidth issues here at the house. So
Yeah.
what webinar did you see today?
I saw the one where you were going over the essential content, but you guys hadn't yet posted the math. You had just posted the English. And
Oh,
then-
gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. I hope you saw the version that we re-recorded because we had some technical problems on that one.
Oh, I did. I saw yeah, you mentioned it at the beginning of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's so like not nervous at all about webinars.
Oh my gosh. Well, good. I'm glad because I was panicking inside.
Oh. Well, I thought,
Not fun.
did you guys, oh, I'm wondering if they, maybe it's one more minute. Yeah, we'll do one more minute. Marissa, if you want to, ever pop off mute and join into the, broader conversation, please feel free.
Okay, yes, thank you. I'm kind of observing today, just kind of seeing what's happening here, but thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, welcome.
And I've been just having some unstable internet all day, so.
Yeah. I get it. Okay. Well,
Do you want me to end the group, Shireen?
yeah.
I heard some good discussion in the breakout room I went into, and also people not sure exactly what all the assessments are at their
Oh.
disposal.
Okay, that's great. All right, welcome back, everyone. We thought that it would be valuable for folks to be randomized into different groups because we know that there are some assessments that are statewide, but we also know that there are other assessments and tools that you guys are using that are maybe unique to your district or to your school. And so I would love for maybe one or two people to share out some of the discussion that took place in your group. And I see some folks who are.
I'll share.
Thank you.
Instead of talking directly about the assessments, one of the things that came up with a couple of us that got to talk, and that went really fast, but we talked about just the power of even just using some of the things we already have used in the past, but actually digging in deeper, letting teachers see the power of some of their data, teachers finding some of the power in their own formative and summative daily questions to diagnose really what's going on in the moment. And so, that really combines with what we've known all along is great, but to have the teachers feel that power, I think has been really important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And we're going to see a couple examples of exactly that formative, those checks for understanding that teachers are used a little later. I could hear from one other person from one other group. This is so awkward. Everybody feels uncomfortable.
There are a lot of really good tools that are built into the tier 1 curriculum that you have. And so the nice part about some of those would be it would align with your instruction later on. And so it makes sense to use some of those. In Nebraska, we have the Nebraska Reading Improvement Act. And so many districts are using things like NWA map to help with screening, but there might be additional diagnostic pieces that come along with the tier 1 programming.
Yeah, and not all assessments are created equal, and not all assessments diagnose the learning that we need to diagnose right away, right? So that's both the blessing and the curse of having a lot of tools at your disposal is sometimes it takes the real time to sit down and dig into what information do I need from this tool that I have in order to teach what I know I need to teach next. So thank you both for sharing that. And yes, I'm sorry that was a very quick breakout rooms. So we will be talking, so the screening assessments, I know that there are different ones, the universal screeners, they do some of this, but that's not always a particularly helpful measure. I gave the example to Elizabeth earlier today. My son is 8 years old and he took the MAP because we do it here in Dallas as well. And the information that I received at the end was that he didn't, he really enjoys math, so he does well in that. But the strategy I was told to teach him more about was money and the different values of the different coins and stuff like that. And I was telling Elizabeth, I was like, that's helpful, except I don't know the last time my son saw me use actual money. Like I always use a credit card. He hasn't gone shopping with me in a full calendar year. So there are so many things that there's no access. There's no, he hasn't had a lot of practice with actual money. And so it struck me that is probably I'm not familiar with the standards for his grade level, but I'm sure that's in the range of things that are important to learn. But I certainly hope that his teacher is not spending a whole lot of time, going through the different increments of actual cash in lieu of teaching him some real major work of second grade, right? that would be a problem. So it gave information, but it wasn't the best information for me, or probably for what the teacher needed to do. So I'm getting a little, it went out. Okay, here we go. So if I can just have a volunteer, Tracy, any chance I can talk you into this? Thank you. If you could please read this for us.
Assessments must be used to support student learning by focusing on instructional support and honoring the specifically designed features necessary for each subject or grade band. Teachers need assessments closely connected to their curriculum that can provide useful information for moving all students forward with grade level learning. Students need those assessments to take as little time as possible.
Yeah, it makes me think of the webinar I saw today that Marissa led that involved, I think it was the one you led, Marissa, that was time is the finite resource, right? Like we can't, it's the one we don't have enough of, and it's the one that we need in order to get a better sense of where kids are. So I think this is really the effort to focus our efforts on making it take as little time as possible to get the most helpful information. And we are going to walk through that process together today so that you can take that information with you. And, you know, as soon as whenever it is that you'll be working with teachers on campuses, to talk to them about possible ways to diagnose the student learning. We are at break. We're going to take Elizabeth, it's a 10-minute, right?
I think 5 minutes is
5
fine.
minutes, okay.
We're still early in the presentation.
Yeah, so if you will, please go off screen, go grab a drink of water, bio break, and we'll see you back here at, we'll say 4:10. 6 minutes, 5 minutes. Elizabeth, does it let you share screen? It does, okay.
Where's it even at? I don't even see it.
All right, looks like it's about 4:10. Hope you had a good bio break. Coming back online. Give folks about 10 more seconds. So thanks, Shireen, for sort of talking with us about the benchmark, the screener assessments, those system-wide assessments that are essential for a school system, but don't quite address this focus of diagnosing unfinished learning. So as we're planning for renewal and accelerated learning, we're going to have to think about diagnosing student learning being intimately connected to the classroom instruction, so that teachers can answer the question, what do my students know and understand related to this current topic, this current unit, the next text, or the next unit that we'll be studying. And when assessments are delivered in this larger way, they often fall short. And here are some of the reasons that they fall short. Either too few items. This could happen at some system and state level assessments where, because you're trying to assess so much, you have too few items to really figure out what prerequisite skills, knowledge, vocabulary students might need for a specific standard or topic. And instead you're getting sort of general trends. A single trait vertical scale. Basically sort of, this would be when you see things talking about mathematical competence or reading comprehension, focusing on one trait and not sort of identifying specifically the mastery that one child has of the sub skills under that. And then lastly, this is my favorite, this idea of just like fuzzy measures, either an imprecise description of what the test aims to measure, which might make it difficult to get an accurate read on students' strengths during that assessment. So we will always use benchmark assessments and screener assessments in our schools. They serve a purpose, and to have a universal screener to identify students that might need more support, of course, we're going to have those things in place. But when we're thinking about diagnostics for determining unfinished learning, we're going to address that in a different way besides those screeners. I want you to think about sort of one of the assessments you currently use at the system level. It could be MAP. I've heard a lot of people talking about that. And a few other folks shared in their breakout rooms. So think about one of the assessments you use at a systems level and where it falls here. Does it maybe fit this too few items principle, single trait, vertical scale, or is it a little bit fuzzy? So think about that. Let me know which assessment you use that might fit one of these core ideas. Throw it in the chat once you have an idea about an assessment that might fit here at that systems level. Okay, great. I got some private messages about MAP specifically. Great, awesome. So when we are here, we want to be thinking about more classroom level assessments, what teachers can use to better assess the specific unfinished learning that students might have. These larger assessments are often used as sort of instructional gatekeepers and could, use to hold students back or group students in different settings. So we really want to know what students know in terms of unfinished learning, so we can catch students up by providing those just-in-time supports. So as we think about the types of assessments or diagnostics that we need moving forward, we want to make a distinction between these traditional assessments and effective diagnostics. So effective diagnostics help teachers determine a student's individual strengths, challenges, knowledge, and skills prior to instruction. Diagnostics are instructional barometers that help instructors gauge how much prior knowledge a student has about a topic, and ultimately help educators answer the questions: how much does this student already know about an upcoming topic? So this year, in your next unit, using these diagnostic tools, we'll be able to determine what students know just in time, so that we can use that essential instructional content guide to provide accelerated learning supports along the way. So each unit we have, either it's a new ELA unit, a new math unit, a new science unit, we want to have a short diagnostic that allows us to gain a better understanding of what unfinished learning might exist. The bottom line here is that students, that we want to really focus our assessments. We can't give too many assessments, so we want to make sure that our diagnostics are meeting the needs of classroom instruction. As you consider sort of how you should use diagnostics to determine unfinished learning, it might be tempting to try to diagnose every sort of unfinished learning gap your students might have, and that's not a good use of your time or theirs. We've already done the work in Nebraska. You guys have a leg up here around what is the essential prior content knowledge and skills that are vital to this year's learning. So your diagnostic approach is short bursts, only for that essential knowledge and skills that can give you actionable data each unit and throughout the year. I want you to sort of reflect back on your last unit or your last PD or your last semester with students and with teachers and leaders. Where do you see your system from your level hitting this out of the park? Where are you able to use diagnostics from high quality materials that you have like Zern? Where are you spending just a few hours on these individual student assessments? And which one of these is really a target for you, something you need to work on in the coming months to strengthen this diagnostic system? So look at these four and reflect for me, where are you knocking it out of the park and where is a good place to focus? I'll give you a second to put it in the chat, or we can have a great discussion too. So just come off mute and tell me where you see success and where you might still be wanting support around diagnostics here. All right, I'm gonna throw you into a quick breakout room. Be thinking here. What are we doing well right now, and where here can we really focus? I see some great chats. I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to share and gets to hear each other's voices. We'll just spend 2 minutes in breakout rooms and come right back.
Sal, I saw you were all by yourself.
I was just getting ready to like, maybe I should hit the button and see. I thought I'd give him a minute, but yes.
You know what's funny is I was looking for your name because I was like, oh, this is exactly what Megan was talking about.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard too. So I'm at the ESU level. And so I wouldn't have really had a good answer for this. I was excited to listen to what districts were sharing. But you know, watching some of them be able to celebrate some of that day-to-day learning and what is missing, what is not. It's a lot though. I mean, teachers are really still here in Nebraska, and I think that really fight or flight mode, and they're not accessing some of the good knowledge that they have. And so navigating that and the trauma and the self-care on top of the critical things that they absolutely know are important, but it's just a lot on their plates right now.
Yeah. I was thinking over lunch, I was like, the amount of institutional trust that is both either being gained or lost right now is going to be felt for a really long time. And like kids, in every aspect of every person's life, something has changed.
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. And I've been, a lot of my teaching background, I was blessed to have had some of that training. I worked with lower socioeconomic status. I learned some of those things, some trauma response type stuff. But now to truly, if we stop and think about it, every single human has gone through trauma in some way. And so, and that's hard because teachers haven't often been taught explicitly how to help their kids, let alone help themselves with that.
Yeah, that's real.
Nothing big, you know, no big deals in education. Thank you for popping in here. I was getting ready to come back. So.
Oh, she's by herself.
And using some of these strategies so that when special education teams are able to look at annual IEP goals, they're not just piecing together a remediation plan, but they're looking at how that student can accelerate into having independence as the year moves forward. And so those are some of the things that, as I reflect on this information, I find very important.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there. This idea of like all means all, like we want to make sure all of our students are getting access to the high quality tier 1 instructional materials that other colleagues were mentioning. And we have to be able to address that unfinished learning, especially for students with IEPs or students who are English language learners along the way. So diagnostics can be helpful.
Absolutely. And also knowing what that essential learning is so people aren't spending hours and hours and hours trying to figure that out. Because the faster that is on the hands, the faster that gets into goals and objectives. With better conversations, I think, on those teams.
Thanks, Brenda. One more from another group. What did your group get to talk about, or where are you trying to focus here?
I can share. Megan and I had a lovely conversation. You know, we were talking about how teachers, everyone is still very much in this fight or flight space, and how the ability for folks to easily grasp what they may have, you know, defaulted to and been able to pull out of their hat, that's frozen somewhere. you know, and that ability to like release that is going to take time, both for teachers, but also like students are experiencing some level of trauma. Every human on this earth right now has experienced some level of change as a result of this. And we don't know what the ultimate results of that will be yet. And so there's a lot of sort of figuring this out for teachers while they're caring for themselves and trying, you know, just getting up every day and making it to campus and being a steady source for kids is its own challenge right now.
Great, thank you. Okay, so these are our 4 steps. So we're gonna come back to them. I wanted you to have time to reflect, and I appreciate you guys engaging in the breakout rooms. Now I wanna jump into sort of, okay, what are our recommendations for diagnostics? If you're in the K2 realm, the early childhood realm, give me just like a woot woot in the chat. Let's see those early childhood folks. Who is working with K2? Who is serving schools there? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Pre-K through 12. There you go. You know, you kind of are always associated with the grade levels you first taught or you first were an assistant principal with. So, you know, I don't know if you started teaching in 5th grade, you might be a 5th grade person. Oh, birth to 3rd grade. Okay, so Melissa, this is you. So if you're in that K2 literacy space, your approach to diagnostics will probably remain largely the same. Diagnostics should be systematic and thorough because you need to get that comprehensive understanding of students' foundational skills, specifically their ability to decode and their overall fluency. The recommendation here is using a system like Dibbles, a tool like Dibbles, which allows you to get all those letter sound fluency tools, sight words, all those components in. There are other systems that do this. But Dibbles is one that sort of gives you those components and is a whole systemic approach. You would want to continue using some sort of fluency assessment in 3rd grade through 12th grade. So in some way, whether it's Dibbles or a different assessment, you'd want to continue to assess after K2. But this is the primary diagnostic tool we'll use in K2 for ELA. You can use sort of in older grades fluency assessments, and you can also track students' fluency on sort of those grade level assessments. It can give you a sense of how students are doing with fluency and decoding on their grade level assessments. For other subjects in 3rd through 12th grade, we'd want to sort of expand our sense of diagnostics. It doesn't have to be sort of paper and pencil, Scantron, bubble forms. We can use a lot of different tools here. This might mean using the assessments in high quality materials that you've already adopted. So if you're using a high quality instructional material, that will likely have diagnostic tools either at the beginning of a unit, midway through the unit, or even beginning of some lessons. For others, it might mean using assessment tools that have like quick subject matter inventories at the beginning of like that course or that unit, just so you can figure out if students are understanding that topic at hand. And it also might be analyzing student work either from the unit before or right at the beginning of a unit, doing some student work and analysis. It might be asking students to engage in error analysis activities, just to see if they can identify where maybe a strategy broke down or where the learning broke down. It could be sort of a simple activity like a KWL chart or a writing prompt. A writing prompt is a great diagnostic, especially to get a sense of students' comprehension skills, as well as of the content knowledge they might need. So in this way, we're suggesting shorter, more frequent diagnostics that allow you to gauge students' unfinished learning along the way throughout the year. What's one benefit to these shorter, more frequent diagnostics? Where do you find sort of a benefit here if we're comparing this and contrasting with our screeners and our benchmarks? Throw it in the chat or come off mute. I'm going to get you all talking. How do shorter, more frequent diagnostics benefit teachers, students in the classroom?
I'll speak. I feel like when the diagnostics are shorter and more frequent, students are given more of an opportunity to move. You're able to be more responsive when they master skills, or when you find out that there are even further underlying needs.
Mm-hmm. Great. Similarly, Megan said they give them the data they need in the moment so they can monitor and adjust instruction. It's a good point, Megan. It doesn't even have to be the beginning of the lesson, right? You could be sort of monitoring and circulating, aggressively monitoring throughout the lesson to be collecting that data. Great. Yeah, and this is a shift from sort of the benchmark screeners that might be consistent across a system of schools. Tammy said teachers are in charge, right? Teachers are driving this diagnostic push, so they can directly tie them to respond with instruction. So you can see that link really clearly for teachers. That's exactly right. All right, great. So bottom line here, just to sort of summarize, this isn't something we're going to do at the beginning of the year and then just move on. This is a continuous process. In your next unit that you're starting, you'll want to make sure schools have diagnostics in place so that teachers, school leaders, and ultimately system level folks have a sense of what is the unfinished learning that we need to be accelerating and how can we provide those just-in-time supports. We also want to remember that, you know, time is always at a premium, right? So we can't be over assessing. So here are the main things that you should be focusing on. Again, in K2, it's going to be students decoding, fluency, and development. In 2nd through 12th grade, you want to continue that focus on students' fluency. Fluency should always be a key piece there. And then additionally, we want to be pre-assessing knowledge of topics within complex texts. So we're going to be focusing on that content knowledge and assessing there to provide those just-in-time supports so that students with unfinished learning can participate and students with IEPs and English language learners can all access that grade level material. We're not regulating them to a different set of standards or a different set of material. Every student can access that grade level content if we provide those just-in-time supports.
Can you explain a little bit more about the pre-assessing knowledge? That isn't what I would expect. And I get where you're going with that. Like you need to have knowledge of these topics in order for that comprehension.
Yeah.
But that seems short on skills and or standards, and maybe I'm just missing the point on that.
Yeah, I think in ELA specifically, so we'll stick with ELA there. The sort of knowledge gap that has existed hasn't been addressed the same way we've been focused so much on skills. So for years, we've been sort of assessing and drilling, what's the main idea? What's the theme, right? So we're gonna give a diagnostic that collects data there. Well, we teach theme at every grade level, right? We're teaching main idea. It's a continuum, right? You learn about theme in 1st grade, and you come up with the lesson of a story and you continue that to 12th grade. It's going to look different in a 9th grade class than a 1st grade class. So the question here isn't really about the skills or the standards. It's about the knowledge that students might not have that will allow them to access that complex text so they can do the work of identifying the theme or the main idea, or, you know, comparing and contrasting characters.
Can I add one quick thing to that?
Yeah.
Andy, I know that you joined us last time, but I don't know if you were there at the very beginning. If you remember the example in the chapter, the excerpt of the chapter that we read that had to do with the cement mixer, and knowing in advance that that was talking about surfing versus, you know, whatever conclusions we all drew before we knew it was about surfing. That's the content that knowing it makes a difference between understanding that reading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it lends itself well to accelerating their learning by either providing more background knowledge for them, or visuals or graphics or whatever is going to help to build that back in. So that makes sense to me.
Cool.
It's not only that though, it's also the combination of the fact that words can have different meanings in different contexts. So it's not just the going forward with the picture, it's being able to have kids begin to understand that they can question when there's disresonance, that it doesn't mean it's a throwaway situation, that it's a future questioning piece. Mm-hmm. And that's the part where a lot of students across multiple groups a lot of times fall apart when they're attempting to begin connecting one idea to another idea. They aren't able to compare and contrast them.
Yeah, and Andy, I'll just add that, like, my biggest worry as an educator right now is that all the work we've done around the opportunity myth and the knowledge gap and accelerating learning, all these PDs are sort of going in one ear and out the other ear of teachers, and that they're reverting back to, I have a main idea worksheet. I'm gonna drill and kill a skill because my kids are so far behind. And so if we can continuously remind them by using a high quality instructional material, by having trainings to teach them how to do diagnostics in this different way, or how to accelerate learning, we can make sure that kids are getting that exposure to grade level content, to complex texts, and that educators who are well-intentioned aren't sort of going rogue and going off of that to be really skill focused. Did that answer your question, Andy? Do you feel like we got there a little bit? Okay, great. And then in math or other content areas, really, you want to think about the most important prerequisite content at each grade level. And you'll find this in the Nebraska Instructional Essential Content Guide. It has a good sense of like where you can look back to find those prerequisite skills. And you really want to elevate that focus, that major work of the standard. If you have a high quality instructional material, you can use those unit level assessments, diagnostic assessments, and that would be preferable to something like a longer interim assessment or a screener. You really want to look for that high quality instructional material that's targeted to that unit or even that topic within the unit. If you're using Engage or Zern, you'll see that there's sort of topics, right, that go in each mission or each module. So our sort of summary here, our takeaway is time is precious. So we gotta focus on the instruction, the instructional elements that matter the most. The major content in mathematics, those key conceptual pieces, and either fluency decoding for lower grades or knowledge. Okay, we built in another break. We know it's a long session. I might move it a little bit because we went a little bit faster in that section than I thought. So I'm going to move this break to later when I feel like we need it. I feel like we just got in a roll. So I'll reschedule a second break for y'all. So don't worry, you'll have a bathroom break. But what I want to do and spend the majority of our time today on is really going through this process of preparing a diagnostic, coming up with a diagnostic, and using that data to address unfinished learning. So in the chat, I'm going to put in another time the handout. If you don't have the handout open, you need it open. If you have it open, great. Read over that first page. It's going to ask you to make a copy, and have it open. So in our last session, we talked about sort of acceleration and renewal. And we looked at an example in A Raisin in the Sun, which was about sort of accelerating student learning within that unit. We're going to think about this same example, A Raisin in the Sun, to diagnostics. You have a little sheet about A Raisin in the Sun. You need a refresher. I added some quotes in the books when we read this book. And then what we're going to go through today is we're going to go through the process of the diagnostic and instructional planning tool. And that's right below on the second page. So we can look through it, make sure everyone's there. So this is a little summary here for you of A Raisin in the Sun. And then what we're going to be going through is this planning your approach to diagnosing student learning. And so you'll notice that there's sort of 9 questions on this form. We're going to start at this like macro level, like this big picture question. And throughout the 9 questions, we're going to zoom in and get more micro. So we're going to use this today. You have a copy all your own. So you can type in it. You can take notes in it. You can copy it and get your team as a tool. I really want you to try to engage as possible in work here from whatever level you're at. So whether you're in a interaction with the student or you're at systems level and you're coaching people within school buildings, you'll be able to jump in and to see where this might be useful.
Elizabeth, just a quick note. You're breaking up a little bit. So I don't know if there's a way to troubleshoot your sound moving forward, but just wanted to give you a heads up that any directions you might need to place in the chat will that persist.
All right. I changed my internet to a new internet source, so I hope that works. Can you hear me better now?
That's better.
Okay, great. I might be sharing too much on my screen, so I'll stop sharing. So we have our handout, and we're going to go through this process with A Raisin in the Sun. What I was saying is, from whatever sort of vantage point you're at, whether you're in a school building, sort of working directly with teachers and leaders, or if you're at the network level, the district level, and supervising folks that are providing support to teachers, we want to make sure you understand this process and that you can implement it in trainings and support people through it.
And so that's good. We found out today his body is like rejecting more the current infusion. So they're gonna start him on a different infusion. It starts with the infusion, but then it goes to
All right. So we're going to get started here with our first question, which is our biggest, highest question here. So in the first box, I want you to be thinking about what grade level or content knowledge and skills, vocabulary, do you think that the curriculum will cover over this unit? So we're thinking sort of big picture. And we want to think about how this unit fits within the curriculum. I'm not going to give you the whole assessment or like the whole unit for A Raisin in the Sun, but I am going to give you the end of unit assessment, which is this prompt here. So this is our prompt that we're going to be using sort of for the rest of today. So at the end of this unit on A Raisin in the Sun, the students are going to be asked, consider 2 characters from A Raisin in the Sun. Write an essay arguing whether each character's dreams and aspirations are more impacted by personal agency or systemic structures. Develop claims and counterclaims fairly, supplying evidence for each while pointing out the strengths and limitations of both in a manner that anticipates the audience's knowledge, level, and concerns. Use evidence from A Raisin in the Sun and any secondary sources in your response. So at the end of the unit, that's what they're going to be asked to do. So now I want you to think in this first box, what's the grade level content knowledge, skills, and vocabulary that students are going to need to be able to access A Raisin in the Sun and to be able to answer this prompt at the end of the unit. You can type a paragraph, you can type a bulleted list, doesn't matter, however you want to get those thoughts out. I'm going to give you just a minute and a half, 90 seconds to work on your own, and then I'm going to ask you to put your thoughts in the chat. Right, about 40 more seconds. What's the content knowledge, skills, or vocabulary students need here? And again, you don't have the whole unit, but do your best thinking about 9th grade English. Okay, throw your answer, your response there in the chat, and I'm going to show you sort of a sample response here to compare to. So throw yours in the chat. And here is the sample you can be thinking about. Can I get a reader for the sample answer here? Come off mute and read us the sample.
Over the course of the year, ninth grade students will read several texts that focus on identity and the role that society, family, and individual agency play on shaping one's identity. In quarter two, the second 9 weeks of the year, students read A Raisin in the Sun. At the end of the unit, the students will be asked to complete an essay where they will, and then what you just read to us.
Great, that's the prompt. Yep, awesome. So you'll see here that the work done here is mostly about this larger content knowledge, the larger themes. You don't see what you might expect, sort of the character development or comparing and contrasting those characters or developing a claim, citing evidence. Those are some of the ELA standards we might be thinking go here. But ultimately, we want to know big picture. What's the why of this curriculum, and where does this unit fit in the context of the year-long unit and the learning that students will be doing? So this is your big why question. And then we're going to move on to this second box, which is what prerequisite content knowledge, vocabulary, and skills will students need to access the grade level content? So now we're moving from a macro answer, more micro, and throughout the document that'll continue. We're thinking about the content knowledge, the skills, and the vocabulary. And I want you to build a list that you can put in the chat, a response. It doesn't have to be dense, so it can just be a bulleted list. And we want to see sort of what are all the components here? What are all the prerequisite knowledge, vocabulary, and skills students might need to be able to access this unit and this assessment? So I'm going to send you to breakout rooms, and in each breakout room, I want you to have one person who's taking notes so that they can come back and put that in the chat, and we can see that bulleted list or that paragraph that you come up with. So you're answering question 2 in your handout in a small group. I'm going to make the group slightly bigger. So you'll have about 5 people in your group this time. A few more. Assign one person to sort of take notes as you come up with your list. See ya in 5 minutes.
And just from what they're going to need to be able to, well, there was vocabulary, of course, that was in there. So they're going to need to be able to, I guess, use context clues, use They're going to be able to need to be able to identify and understand how to look up words, how to associate the main idea, the theme, and connect it all to creating a piece of writing at the end. So formulating their argument, knowing how to back up their argument for what they're saying, those kinds of skills, I think would all be things that we'd have to be trying to teach along the way before that assessment could be given.
At least.
Right. When citing evidence, the text-dependent analysis skills, that skill set would be necessary. I think primary sources was mentioned in there. How do you use them? What do they look like?
Really difficult for us to just jump right in and just read about a paragraph or two about what we're supposed to do and just guess it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you said some good things that we pulled out just from just that little part of it right there. There's a lot of skill sets in there, things that have to be prepared, like pre-taught ahead of time, or they have to understand ahead of time in order for them to be successful to write that piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they can totally cultivate the funds of knowledge along the way, but there are certain things that they need to know prior to starting this, the conversation.
I would say that, you know, this is the kind of thing I would probably scaffold with
and vocabulary, knowledge, skills, and vocabulary. We had about 6 groups. So oh, there we go. Lori, your group had a lot there. Great. And I was in a group with Michelle, I think Michelle Parker, who's a longtime English teacher. Michelle, can you unmute and just talk a little bit about how you were approaching this task and the list you guys came up with?
Sure. I've taught English for quite a few years. I think it's like 17, and I've been a curriculum specialist over English for the last couple. And so we were just talking about deconstructing the prompt, making sure students understand the wording that's in the prompt, what they're being asked to do, but then also being able to formulate their argument, back their argument up with evidence from the text, as well as supporting their own interpretation of what character is, what that character does, and why they're coming up with this understanding from themselves. So I guess interpretation was a part of that conversation as well.
Great. Awesome. And Michelle did a great job sort of summarizing for her group. What bucket would those fit in, the things she's bringing up, she's surfacing? Would that be knowledge, skills, or vocabulary? What are you hearing in her description? Knowledge, skills, or vocabulary? Come off mute and let me know what you heard her talking about. I see some other people writing like claim, counterclaim, sources. Citing evidence, how to write an essay. What are all these examples of? Is that knowledge, skills, or vocabulary?
I would say skills.
Great. Thanks, Jan. Yeah, we focused, a lot of groups focus specifically on that skills section. So look in the chat and look for folks that talked a little bit more about any knowledge or vocabulary. Do you see any other knowledge or vocabulary to share? What might be some knowledge that we need to build here? Historical context, okay. Langston Hughes, great. Right. So I want to get back to, I think, Andy's question here. And I'll share again so we can look at an example here. So this was the question, and here's a sample answer. So read this answer and sort of compare it to your group. So this teacher is listing mostly knowledge. They do mention some skills around characters and character development and analysis of maybe less complex texts, less complex characters. But ultimately, if you look in the knowledge column here, you see Great Migration, redlining, some of the context, the historical context that was going on at the time. Why might that knowledge be critical to student success on the end of unit assessment? Why is knowledge something we're talking about over maybe some of those skills that we all mentioned? What's the value of addressing this knowledge gap?
It reflects the depth of comprehension of not just the story, but the context of the story, and therefore the implications on the characters.
Great. And even if you're a great sort of character analyzer, even if you've been analyzing characters your whole life, your whole academic career, if you don't have that historical context, if you don't have the knowledge, you won't be able to answer that essay prompt. You won't understand what's happening. So that knowledge is really one of the gaps we might need to close. That could be a place where that unfinished learning exists. Great. Okay, you guys did great. You've done 2 of the boxes. We've got a few more to go, but I'm going to give you a 10-minute break now. Bathroom, water, whatever you might need. We'll come back together at 5:20 and we'll continue going through our graphic organizer to get through the process that needs to be done. So regardless of your role, you can access it. Maybe you're going to be doing this work, or maybe you're going to be supporting leaders to do this work, and you want to know when you go into that training what that work should look like. So we've answered questions 1 and 2. We're going to jump to question 3. What data do I already have on my students? And this is where you're going to use some of those other assessment tools that you have, the benchmarks, the screeners. You're going to look at the data that you have from MAP, the fluency data you have from DIBELS, or another source like that. And also as teachers and as leaders, we have a wealth of knowledge ourselves. So you can think historically, where has been the challenge for your students? This teacher reflected on sort of the figurative language that they saw in the book, or other sort of knowledge skills that might be a challenge. Again, at your systems level, you can do this work because you have access to those streams of data. And then teachers and curriculum folks can do it a little bit closer to kids to add any context.
And this is also where teachers who've been teaching the same content year after year, I'm thinking of really strong math teachers that I've worked with in the past, who can anticipate the misconceptions that kids will have, but who also may have strong relationships with the math teachers from the students' previous years, and be able to sort of say, hey, you know, did you guys get to this point? Or
that kind of stuff. It's an opportunity to leverage the teacher's experiences.
Awesome. The next question is, what acceleration supports does my curriculum already include? If you're using a high quality instructional material, there's often built-in scaffolds and supports to help students navigate or engage in this grade level material. So in this example that we put, the curriculum already has sort of secondary resources or those nonfiction texts that might be linked to provide that historical context. So there's already resources built into the curriculum. One thing that happens when we're trying to accelerate learning and we might be cutting days from our curriculum to fit it in a scope and sequence for our school calendar. We're trying to make those adjustments to make sure that we're providing students with the acceleration they need for their unfinished learning. We might be inclined to cut some of these secondary sources or these resources. But if we know that our students have a unfinished learning around sort of the knowledge here, we want to make sure that these supports are included. So yes, A Raisin in the Sun, the lessons around the fiction book are going to be key, but also we want to include those informational sources, informational texts that will help students build knowledge and in a really intentional way. So for this step, teachers or system leaders are just looking at the curriculum itself, gathering those tools and making sure they understand the why behind why those pieces are included. What gaps do I still have pertaining to this unit? This is really the first question where sort of the teacher or the school might have more information than the district level team. And this might be where the teacher and the school level really kicks in. It could be that the teacher doesn't know if they got any information in social studies about Great Migration or Chicago South Side, or some of the sort of policies during the 1900s. So just sort of not knowing from a teacher's perspective where students are in sort of the civics units that they might have needed to cover to really be able to access this. So this question would probably best be answered at that teacher school level. So you might gather this information if you're at district level, you might gather this information from the school level so that you can be thinking at the district level on your curriculum teams. How can we accelerate learning here? How can we fill these gaps that teachers are identifying in this diagnostic planning tool? If teachers are raising a concern for you, then the curriculum team can address those pieces. And then the next question is, how can I diagnose student knowledge and unfinished learning? So based on what we've covered, how could you diagnose if students have the background knowledge, the content knowledge they're going to need to be successful in this unit, A Raisin in the Sun? So I want you to be thinking about that. How can I diagnose student knowledge and unfinished learning? We've talked about these being short. We've talked about these being frequent. We've talked about a range of different ways we could do this. So I'm going to put you back in your rooms, in your breakout rooms. And I want you to be thinking, coming up with a sample diagnostic that a teacher could give before they start this unit. You don't have to have it completely fleshed out, right? It's not for a grade, but I want you to have an idea of a way that you would approach this diagnostic. This is the key diagnostic for this unit. Sharon, do you see the breakout rooms by chance? They've disappeared from my screen. All right. So go ahead and join your group, and I'll give you 7 minutes for this task.
Hi, I wasn't, my name is Amy Himes, and I wasn't able to join until after 5 o'clock. So I am just going to listen in, but I am with Millard. Is there a way that I can join the Millard breakout group?
Well, so we did this today's session. We did random breakout groups because the
Okay, so is Andy DeFries or Jan Dahlgard, whatever room Jan is in?
Let me put you in with Andy.
Thanks.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, he's in group 6. Oh, I don't know where she went. Oh, she disappeared.
Earlier with that.
Okay.
Prompt.
There's Sharon. She can help us out with that too.
Okay. So like if we said a skill is finding evidence to support your claim, how can we diagnose that before we actually do it? Is that the question? Okay. I can think of basic ideas.
Yeah.
You could give a claim and have them highlight the evidence that's already in a reading that you've chosen. Or, I mean, do you want them to write the claim and find the evidence? You could do a lot of different things because we mentioned a lot of skills.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's not like
You all
it's
mentioned a
nothing
lot of
to
skills.
be fancy. Like
Okay.
one of the like offered suggestions is a KWL chart on like this time period, right? So that you can really understand what the kids know.
Okay.
But knowing full well that, you know, they don't necessarily remember all the details, but you'll get the sense of what coming front of mind for them to be able to then pick at it a little bit more and find out.
Okay. So Courtney, it seemed like this was more your area. What was your favorite skill? And we got that.
I mean, I think that like use either the like citing evidence, the skills, or you can hear my dog growling in the background.
It's okay.
The skill
What
of
they're there for.
evidence, or I think just like you just said with the claim, just in like an argumentative writing, they're going to need to be able to do both. But even if it was something as like informal, like I do in my classroom often, just sending out like a quick form, like even if it was just like what's the claim of this piece, you know, just take out like a super quick 30-second like feedback on what they know just in regards to a claim. I think is pretty simple. So there's one diagnostic tool.
Wonderful. You don't need me. I'm going to another room.
Timing was perfect.
See y'all later.
Okay.
Elementary or secondary?
I'm a secondary English teacher who then was, after that, I moved into the elementary world as an assistant principal in public schools, and have now moved to the Buffett Early Childhood Institute. So I'm birth through grade 3.
You just keep getting lower and lower. Oh, we've been able to.
Part of it being, oh my gosh, I have 9th grade kids who can't read at a 4th grade level. Where is this happening? Where? And not having that.
Well, birth to 3 is where we need you to start. So
yeah, it's a good place to be.
that's because that's part of this too, is I am fully elementary background. I mean, I've been at the ESU for some years now, so that's helped me widen it. But I think some of this comes so naturally to elementary teachers more than maybe it does at the secondary level, because they have to be masters of so many subjects. And and they have the ability to manipulate their day a little bit. When English is up in high school, it's up. The bell rings and that's gone. As an elementary teacher, I could say, you know what? We're not going into math yet. We got a few things we need to redo here. And so I think that mind shift is I'm struggling with that through this learning today. It's like, well, that's just what you do. When your kids don't know something, you just teach them that. But elementary is not as confined by periods and bells and systems and even assessments for that matter. They can be a little bit more fluid in teaching and reaching their kids.
And that makes me think back to middle school was my area, and I mean, I'm 25 years in, so going way back to when we were teaching in thematic units, so that cross curriculum we could say, here are these big pieces. I'll take this piece in English. You're going to take this piece over here in social studies, and kind of being able to work with the same group of students and manipulate how we each could come into that learning was a little bit easier.
Well, and powerful for the learner too, because maybe I don't understand it the way you teach it, but then now Melissa's teaching it and I'm like, oh, okay. That's what Mrs. Caldwell was talking about.
Yeah.
It's funny. I hadn't thought of it the way that you described it, Megan, with like the difference between elementary and high school. Cause I have also done pre-K through 12, but my focus has been on high school, and almost always the time you spend in high school, you're like, okay, where are they at? And they need to graduate. So like, how do we get them from here to the end game, in this, to your point, like bell schedule, number of minutes.
And parents want reports, and they want a GPA, and they want things that, I mean, we can shift thinking to standards-based in elementary. I was in a district that tried to pull that off even at the middle school level, and it wasn't happening. Because
it's such an interesting challenge that like and then you think about, they go to so many different post-secondary, like where they go after they leave you in high school is so different. And that's, about 10 years of my professional life was working with alumni, and like, when they come back and they're like, how come we didn't read more books in school? And it's like, oh yeah, we needed to do more of that.
College freshmen saying, we didn't cover how to do taxes.
Right.
Yeah.
Things. So that's interesting. That's a really good framing for.
And at the same time, I think those minutes in elementary school, I mean, there's not even passing time. At some point you're going to take your kids to the bathroom, but is that coming out of math, or is that coming out of whole group reading?
That's true too. Something does have to give. If I stay on reading for 15 extra minutes because they don't know something, something's got to give.
Yeah. So complex.
Thanks, ladies.
All right, I see we're coming back. Great discussions in the 2 rooms I was in. I want to hear what y'all have come up with in terms of diagnostics you could do based on this example. It is a tricky example. It's ELA. We might not all be familiar with the entire unit here. But I want to see what we came up with. So go ahead and throw in the chat your specific diagnostic draft that your group came up with. Yep. And I'm going to have, we're going to get a few of those in the chat. And then I already warm called one person from my group. So I told her I'm coming to her first because she had a great idea and a good thought process, I think, around this. So we have writing prompt, open-ended questions with a checklist of keywords, KWL chart, highlighting examples and non-examples. writing a claim, can you prove your claim with highlighted evidence? All right, Shelley, tell me a little bit about what you were talking about the exhibit you just went to locally, and how maybe that tied into your thinking about this diagnostic.
Yeah, down in North Omaha, I think it's at the Jazz Love Center. There's a, or Love Jazz Center, I can't remember. There's an exhibit on redlining. And I have to be honest, I did not know a whole lot about redlining until this exhibit came about. So I've done some reading on it. And so we thought to access their content knowledge, we would do a writing prompt with students about and ask them what were the 5 most important events of the civil rights movement, but take it a little bit further, where they would write, a paragraph about this, and then ask them to defend and say, why do you think those were the most important? And you'll get a really good idea really fast about where their knowledge is on this topic. I think the age of your students would make a difference, because depending on what year they're reading that, in OPS, they generally read that when they're juniors, and they would have had world history or American history in 8th and 9th grade. So they would have a fairly decent knowledge base on that. However, if they were reading it earlier, like in 9th grade, they may not have covered that yet. So it varies according to what year they are too. Their experience too will have a lot to do with it, will affect that.
Responses to Shelley, ideas, questions. I'll jump in with what I noticed, and then I'll open it up one more time to hear from a few more voices. But what I noticed is a lot of the diagnostics here are focusing on that writing piece. And I think what Shelley was able to do was combine the writing, so a written response, with some of that content knowledge that we want to be able to assess. And I think that pairing works well. So we're not just having them write about other characters, reading about, a short story and writing about some other character development. We're asking them to write about some of the content we need to determine if they have. And the connection to the redlining exhibit might be great. Maybe this class went to that redlining exhibit with their history class or civics class, and they might have more background knowledge than we are assuming. So we always want to diagnose that to see where the unfinished learning is, what the content gap is that we can fill. So here are 2 examples of sort of what a central office might write in response to this question. A teacher might get more granular, but I wanted to show you sort of 2 responses that could come from the district office. So in both of these cases, you'll see a similar format. And many of you had these same ideas. We had a group talk about a KWL chart. So read these and compare them to your group's diagnostic. Reflections here after doing the work of coming up with a diagnostic and then seeing the exemplar diagnostic that you could use here. Let's hear from 2 people.
Our group didn't go as complex as this. Our group probably talked a little bit more about, as you were describing earlier, more the granular and more the, how do we, build to this a little bit more as we're in our classroom lessons. And things like turn and talks, the answer, describe what you think this is, kinds of questions, and then listening for their vocabularies, listening to how they explain things to each other, or they're explaining things in class, or just that drop writing prompt that helps them. The other thing is having them do non-examples for things like if we're citing sources. So you hand them an example that has several mistakes in them and finding out which group could figure out which mistakes, if they all got them, if they got none of them, and what would need, what kind of teaching or what kind of lesson would need to take place there.
Great.
I would share one other thing that didn't occur to me earlier, but is occurring to me now, is what an opportunity diagnosing could be for introducing other modalities. So whether it's, let's listen to this song, let's listen to Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday and talk about, what the context is there. An episode or a clip from a TV show or something like that. I think there's ways to introduce the content and then spark their memory of what knowledge they already have, and then dive into really thinking of all of the different ways that knowledge could connect. So.
Great. And then we're gonna think, what information will or did you gather from this diagnostic? So what will this diagnostic really help you understand? You want to be sure that's going to align back to our previous work on the main knowledge, skills, and vocabulary needed. So in this case, the sample 1 prompt would really help students understand how to make sense of a plot, how to make sense of author's words and phrases, and identifying what the author is saying about a character within a literary text. In sample 2, with the KWL chart, we're talking more about students' knowledge of the time period. So we're learning more about the time period and the historic events. So you might use the first diagnostic in a different context than the second, depending on other pieces of data you have for where students are at. The first one's going to give you a better sense of their writing ability, of their skills in English, whereas the second one is almost exclusively focused more on that content. And then really, where will this inform instruction? So you want to be thinking for every diagnostic assessment, how is this going to inform your instruction moving forward? You don't want to give a diagnostic, take that time, take that energy and effort, and then just put it in a drawer and keep going with your curriculum. So here is where you really want to focus on bringing in skills and strategies and content that can bridge the gap between unfinished learning that exists for students before they start this unit or before they start a specific lesson. And then we have, how should this diagnostic be administered? These two examples are pretty clear in their design and how they might be administered, but there might be diagnostics that are trickier. And the goal of this question is to make sure systems leaders and leaders and teachers are clear about how the diagnostic is administered across all rooms that are using it, so you get relevant and accurate data. Leaders might also find this step helpful as you think about feasibility of diagnostics and which diagnostics you can use in a given setting. Some might be too cumbersome or time consuming. And if they don't easily translate for your context, you might want to find an alternative diagnostic. So for our two examples, we sort of just get a bulleted list of how this should go. So if you're going to diagnose student learning, you want it to be a cold read. They are getting little or no additional information. They're being asked to read or listen to those texts and complete a writing prompt. They should have a set amount of time. And you also might want them to do a little bit of fluent reading. Again, that wasn't clear in our first example, but if that was in your plan, you might want to make sure that teachers understand how they're delivering that portion of the diagnostic. In sample 2, you're having a discussion as a class. So some of this is going to be a little bit class-based, but you would also want those individual KWL charts that teachers are completing so that you have their own individual reflections. Similarly, you can ask them to complete that W portion sort of after the reading, and that could be done individually. So the K portion might involve some group time. So thinking about these 9 sort of questions and this process, how can this process help you as a system leader and teachers and leaders in schools better identify and create the diagnostics that you'll need for this upcoming unit or for next year's instruction? How does this process help formulate your thoughts and help you create diagnostics? I want you to be thinking through that. And I'll do our last breakout room of the evening, our last breakout room before we come back for our final thoughts to share sort of how this process can be helpful for you, what you gained from this process and where you see it working. So check in with your folks, let them know. And so I'd love to hear some other reflections. How could you use this? How do you foresee using this? I know Virginia in our small group talked about her math background and the math context. We did look at an ELA example tonight. On Thursday, we'll do one ELA example and one math example. So we will have a little bit more math time for the math folks. Virginia, any thoughts that you could share with the whole group?
But I talked a little bit about how we can't take a whole day just to retest a unit, but then what are the skills that they had previous, maybe how can we add those in at the beginning of the lesson? We want to look at the learning criteria for the learning goals and what did they need to do for that? And could we add them on, it's a massive thought for me, to our district common assessments. But it's just that those minute ones. We don't want a whole day of testing in math for them to say, oh, they don't know what this from this unit. We don't want to go test every tiny little thing. We just need to do a few real good basic ones to say, where are they at? And then progress on for there. It's intensive for, I think at any subject level, whether it be English language arts that Shelley said that she saw capitalization going on in every grade level for a lesson when we don't need that in math. We don't need a lesson at every grade level on how to change improper fractions into mixed numbers. I mean, that is something that probably is smaller that we don't need to have that lesson every time we do fractions. So that's where we were going.
Any other reflections before we come back for final thoughts? Okay, well, I'll jump in here with just sort of, our final thoughts for today. So once you have an idea of the data you have and then the data you need and the tools you want to use to get it, you want to formalize a plan. We've put together some final points that can help you sort of think through this plan as you're preparing for your next unit this year or as you're preparing for next year and those PD days and curriculum days at the beginning of the year. So you definitely want to partner with parents and families or sort of student support network here as you sort of get a sense of what are the needs. You don't want to lead with assessments. You want to make sure that these diagnostics aren't adding extra assessment days, but that they're getting you the critical information you need to accelerate just in time. So using them sparingly and throughout your units so that you're gathering information on fractions right before you're teaching that content in math. Do no harm. Although assessments give us a lot of information, they shouldn't be used to engage in sort of practices that are harmful. We definitely don't want to use our diagnostic data as a cause for retention or tracking groups of students. And it shouldn't be used to reduce instruction time. So we definitely don't want to give a diagnostic and then be like, oh, these students need to be pulled out and do below grade level work. We want to make sure everyone is included in that grade level content and that we are filling in strategies, skills, content, knowledge, or vocabulary that they may need that might be unfinished. Less is more. So there might be a lot of tools to think through here, but you want to make sure that you have generated sort of a short list of diagnostic tools best suited for your curriculum in your district, the curriculum materials that you've adopted, and you want to make sure it's as close to classroom instruction as possible. So whether it's teacher created or teachers have input, using this handout, these 9 questions with teachers, could be great in PLCs if you have them or if you're rolling them out. Communicate this and develop your partners and stakeholders. If this is different than the work you've done before, you definitely want to gather buy-in, maybe by doing a professional development for a PLC, making sure those PLCs can implement this new strategy. And you want to make sure that teachers and leaders are trained on how to administer and use the data from your chosen diagnostics so that they can effectively plan those lessons. Assess for student learning, not accountability. So diagnostic assessments should not be used for educator accountability. That's not the purpose. So not sort of calling a teacher out or using it as a got you moment, making sure this is really about student learning and student growth. And commit to the long game. We know that there's unfinished learning we need to address. That's going to happen this year. It's going to happen next year. We're going to be filling this unfinished learning for a while. If you take anything from our example around New Orleans and the work after Hurricane Katrina, we know 15 years out, we're still addressing unfinished learning and consequences of that natural disaster on our students in our community. And so really thinking through this diagnostic tool as a way to accelerate learning now so that you can close those gaps and make sure students are caught up. So just let me know sort of what are the questions that are lingering for you and a next step that you're committing to. That will help us sort of inform our thinking about the next session on Thursday, if there are lingering questions that we can answer, or if there's next steps here. So fill up the chat for me. It's great for me to get some feedback and Shireen to get some feedback. So chat us up with questions that you have, things we could have answered, we can answer in the future, and then anything you're committing to now.
If you're also thinking, you know, I don't know what to write in the chat, if you have, you know, like if you're thinking it would be really helpful, I really just want to talk with the people in my district, or I really want to make sure that when we do ELA and math that I'm able to, you know, connect with so-and-so, that would be helpful too, because as we're planning those out, we want to make sure that this time is used in the way that best suits you. Yeah, Christy, the language is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Ellen.
Yes. Yeah, Melissa, I think going through this process will hopefully, these 9 questions will hopefully narrow down what is the knowledge that needs to be focused on, but it's so much knowledge and skills. I also have some private chats just about sort of time for this. Like if you don't have PLCs, when can groups get together to do this work? We will think about that and come next week with some suggestions about how to sort of engage teachers if you don't have a PLC or a PD time that you could dedicate to this. I think teachers instinctually want to do diagnostics, so I think you might have the will and just need to do a little bit of skill building to make sure that teachers in schools are able to do this. Next week, on Thursday, we will be doing a math example and an ELA example around sort of determining sort of essential content, essential skills, essential prerequisite skills and knowledge that might need to be built. And so that is key. We will make sure we have math and ELA represented. Great. From the district perspective, having common understanding of what accelerated learning is and how to approach it. I think that's right. The district approach, making sure everyone in your district office is clear.
Ooh, Lisa, I'm glad you said that because we will be focusing on 4th grade next time. So got you.
Get ready, Lisa.
Ooh, 3D science. My son just was very excited.
Awesome. These are great chats and a lot for us to continue on. Thank you, Tammy, for making your commitments. I see a few commitments from Katie. Great job.
Thank you all for staying with us to the very end.
Last next steps are just, making sure you're looking at that Nebraska's essential content document, really helpful. Determine what you have and really work on using this diagnostic tool to help you develop what you need. So exciting. Thank you guys for your time. Really appreciate you. We will see many of you on Thursday where we are doing both math and ELA and talking more about determining the essential content and skills to cover.
Thank you so much.